Hello again and welcome to The Luxury Choice, a B2B technical sales and business podcast brought to you by the training team of George James Limited. My name is Steve Vaughan. I'm a member of the training team here and I'm also the host and the producer of this podcast. And I've also got a bit of a cold, so if I'm a bit croaky sounding today, it's not your listening device or your headphones, it's actually me with a slight croak, so my apologies for that. I'm enjoying also today with another colleague of mine who's also got a bit of a cold today. It's from our team meeting, I think, Jonathan, recently. How are you? Jonathan Slasinski, how are you doing?
Doing well, Steve. Great to be here.
Good. And we're slowly getting over our lurgies. But more importantly, we have a guest today again. And our guest today is Matt McCormack, who works for a company, he's a sales manager for a company called Natus Sensory. So, Matt, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
No problem at all. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Jonathan.
Why don't you just tell the listener a little bit about yourself, your background, and then the role you have at Natus?
Yeah, sure. So as you just mentioned, I work for a company called Natus Sensory. We're a leading global medical device manufacturer, mainly in the hearing and balance and newborn care products. My current role is as an international sales leader for the UK, Ireland and the Nordics. So I manage our direct sales and clinical teams, as well as our distribution partners in that region. But as well as medical devices, we also offer supplies and consumables for capital equipment, but also services such as calibration, repairs, clinical training. So I've got good experience selling different solutions, whether that be products or services into the healthcare sector.
Okay. So your customers would be NHS organisations typically in the UK? Or?
Yeah, both NHS and private practices as well.
Okay. So thank you so much for coming on. And you reached out to me a little while ago, and I do appreciate you stepping up and offering to be on the show today. Thank you so much.
It's all my pleasure.
So what are we going to talk about today? Well, the sort of working title for this podcast today is I'm not the technical expert, and that's okay. Now, that's not talking to me specifically, although I could argue the case it probably is. But from a sales perspective, what do we mean, really? It's why is it okay if you're in a sales team and you're not the most technical? Bear in mind, our people listen to this, and our customers typically are people in life science, lab, medical devices, which are technical fields. But as a sort of working title, and I guess a slightly provocative title, you don't necessarily have to be the most technical person in the team to be the best salesperson. So let's knock that one around. So, Jonathan, first of all, do you agree with that premise as a working topic?
I agree with it in the fact that you can be successful without being technical. But
Okay.
I will say in my enablement past, I wanted my reps to be as technical as possible. Obviously, to back up the sales skills. But again, there's times when you have new products or there's things maybe you're not as comfortable with, that you don't need to be that technical to still engage with customers, talk to them, understand their needs. The basics of sales is not technical. It's building understanding, it's qualifying, it's understanding who these people are and trying to build those relationships. That's not technical. And if they can do that and then add that technical layer on, that's just going to blow their credibility through the water.
I guess your business is a very technical business, Matt. How important is technical product knowledge, should I say, in your sales team skills?
Yeah, to an extent it is. Obviously, you don't want reps that don't know the products, but at the same time, I would much rather them be transparent and honest about the knowledge when they're talking to clinicians and very experienced people in their field. So there's no problem at all with saying, that's a great question, I don't know, but let me come back to you. I'll find out the answer to that.
I know, man, who does.
Use that exercise as a learning opportunity to maybe build a list of frequently asked questions or difficult questions that you get asked to prepare better for next time.
And I guess
I love what you just said there, Matt. It's funny. It's like I always would think, when you're talking to PhDs, and I wasn't a PhD when I was selling to PhDs. If you don't know something, just be honest. I think so many reps try to, they get into this trap of I have to answer, I have to sound smart, and that usually, puts you back in a hole. Which again comes to this. It's like you don't have to be technical. Be honest, right? I don't understand this, but you know what? I'm going to get that answer for you. And I think that's what customers want. They want a little bit of a solution, but they also want to know that you're working for them and you're really going to try it out. And then again, from the rep perspective, then you learn. So the next time you get asked that question, hopefully you can answer it a little bit better. But I love that you said that. It's about that transparency.
Yeah, great point. And I guess our customers, they will always be more technical than we are in their particular field because it's their career, it's their job, it's often their life's work that we're talking to them about, listening to them talk about in a sales call, really. But I guess we need need to know the basics, don't we? So, I mean, I know companies in lab equipment in the past, for example, who've hired people from like an FMCG background, very different sales background, and it's never really worked from my experience. So please ring in and tell me if you know different. But normally, I think you do need some technical knowledge to be able to empathize with the customer. So I don't know how much is enough, but you do have to have enough. Would you agree with me on that, Matt? Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the approaches that I certainly used in my career, and I encourage our sales teams to do, is say to the customer also, I'm new. There's no harm with that when you're starting out in a new role. It's probably a card that I played for more than 6 months, going and seeing some customers, and just saying, let me learn from you. What can I, if it's in a hospital environment like my reps, ask them to shadow a clinic, even within the team, speak to your colleagues, see if you can follow along from them and pick up some of that expertise along the way. So I would recommend anyone to do that, particularly starting out in either a new role or a new field.
Sure. And in your background, Jonathan, with your sales enablement background, how much did you get involved in the technical side of the training, or was that another organization or another team that did that?
Yeah, so in my first role, we actually had a technical training team, which was fantastic. And, all the reps went through what we would consider a technical training light, right? The field application scientists, the science and technology advisors, the engineers, they went through more of a deeper technology training. But that, that kind of level set them on the technical aspects. And then it came down to the sales skills part of it. But I will say the reverse was, when we would have application scientists, come into sales roles, these very technical minded people, there was a little bit of a learning curve of what, you don't always have to be, you don't always have to be spewing technical and technical expertise and talking about this. It's really just about connecting and figuring out what does the customer need, and then aligning those to those technical, aspects that we have. So it's kind of funny, like, you always want your reps to be technical. But then when you get technical reps, you want them to be a little bit less technical. It's kind of that ebb and flow of what we have, or at least what I experienced, in this life science market.
I can think back to my own career, and I won't mention the companies involved, but when I moved to a very large US-based instrument company, you can probably work out the rest really. I didn't have that same technical background as some of my peers, even though I'm coming in a senior management role, really. And I felt that quite a disadvantage. In fact, I felt a little bit of inverse snobbery almost. There was, dare I say, perhaps people look down on me a little bit, if I'm being really honest, because I didn't have the PhDs and I had a degree in chemistry, but not that sort of domain knowledge that some of my peers did. But then my view on that was, well, that's your role, guys. I bring other skills, I bring other benefits to the organization, really. So can you be too technical, do you think, guys? Is that in a sales role? So that's for you both.
I'll go, Jonathan. Yeah, I think you can. I think that's probably a mistake I made early in my sales career as well, was trying to, make sure you get all those features and benefits in, regardless of whether you really fully understood it or not. And yeah, there's no real advantage to that. Like I said, there's much more. It's much more effective to be honest and transparent and listening. I think tends to be a downfall of some sales reps. Certainly when they first start out, is wanting to talk a lot more rather than listen to the customer's requirements. Yeah, totally. So I think it's trying to find that balance.
Right. Do you agree on that, Jonathan?
Yeah, definitely. I feel very similar experience with Matt, where it's, especially when I was younger, it was always like, how do I get enough of this how do I, speak enough so that they think I'm credible, smart? Because again, Steve, like you, I didn't have the PhD, right? I did have a science background, but I didn't have the PhD. So, I was always trying to be like, well, how do I build this credibility? Well, let me sound like I'm so technical. And it took a couple years in my career where it's like, no, just listen to them and have them talk and try to connect. And that's where I really started seeing some of these successes happen from that perspective.
And I think the danger is, sorry, Matt, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, just on the subject of that, a former manager of mine gifted me a book a number of years back, just talking about this
sales
subject.
book. Here we go.
Yeah. I think it was like a Christmas gift for the sales team, but it sort of resonated with me, and some of the stuff I still think about today, actually. So it's don't be put off by the title. It's a book called Go Naked: The Credible Expert.
Wow.
By a guy called Michael Smith. I think he was an ex-medical device rep. But the concept of the book is that personal credibility is much more effective and powerful than selling based purely on features and benefits. So, you don't necessarily have to be overly technical to be successful. Just be someone that the customer can trust. And I'd recommend it to any of your listeners.
Well, look, the fact that a customer would email me and they get a reply, the next morning, or I would be in the lab the next day if there's an issue. That's that credibility, Matt, that you just speak about, right? And it's another thing that I used to train on, which was, the kind of the scale of credibility versus likability. Like, where do we need to be, and what do you feel is most important? And again, most like the technical people be like, oh, I have to be credible. And then some of the sales reps would be like, nah, I'd rather be more kind of towards this like likable phase. So it's just funny to see how different, team members react to that. But again, I love kind of what you're talking about, when it becomes down to that credibility versus this technical expertise. Did they address my need?
How do we get the credibility? Sorry, Jonathan. How do we get the credibility then with the customer? So, it's hard to imagine now, but imagine I'm a young salesperson, my first sales job with a chemistry degree, and I don't know, and I've had the product training, but I don't know everything about my product applications, and I'm meeting a professor, expert in his field. Really. How do we get the credibility without having necessarily because you never have all the technical knowledge, how do you get the credibility? What kind of things can we do with somebody like that to get, credibility in their eyes, really? What kind of things?
I always thought it came down to, the personalization, right? Do you understand what they're doing? And can you just connect just a little bit on, when you introduce yourself as a new rep, just connect a little bit on what they're doing, right? That right off the bat is going to be like, oh, they researched me, or they read this paper, or they looked around my lab and they understand my work, right?
Sure.
Right off the bat, personalize something, right? Figure out a way that you can personalize and make a connection. And that's non-tech. That can be non-technical. It just has to be. I used to walk the halls in the NIH, and I'd look at a poster and I'd be like, okay, cool. What are they using? Boom. I go in there, start talking to them about that. How'd you know we were using that? Oh, your poster was outside. I was reading it. Oh, you actually spent time reading your poster. Yeah, I did. You don't have to read a poster now. We just put the poster into ChatGPT and it, summarizes it for us. But, just ways to make those connections. I don't know, Matt, how do you feel about that kind of stuff?
Yeah, and I think that's it. It's really good. It's something that I've seen my teams do well. I know a couple of your previous episodes on the podcast were about utilizing LinkedIn. And I know I've seen my team do that with, if they've seen someone's won an award or written a paper or something like that, it's just dropping that into the conversation. It's also more human, isn't it? It sort of builds that relationship and that rapport rather than just going in and waiting to tell them all about your product or your service, have that human interaction.
Yeah. And I think also, and LinkedIn's a great example of this, but your own personal network could be a great way of building credibility, can't it, really? Knowing people who are doing similar work to this customer or similar situations where you've helped a customer out, you can refer to that experience or that scenario and build the credibility that way, really, certainly, yeah. So technical knowledge, can you be a comfort zone, do you think, for people in our industry, or too much technical knowledge? Is it something they almost use as a security blanket or as a crutch, mixing my metaphors?
I mean, I think I've seen a mix of it. I think I've seen that, those very technical reps come in and think that they know more than the customer, right? Which can sometimes, put the customer on the offensive, or again, when we talk about that credibility, are you really making that connection where when you come in as a know-it-all, that could turn off some people. And then again, you have that where you don't know anything, and then everyone's going to be like, whoa, what are they doing? Like, they don't know anything, so there's both sides to that equation. And I've seen both, right? To me, I always wanted to be as technical as I could be, right? Just so I would have that in the background. But I think my forward facing was always the relationship, the need, connecting with them on something, that was a human or more of a personal level, right? This is the salesman in me, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think it depends on the individual as well. In teams I've managed, I've seen clinicians come in and do sales roles and do it really well because they can speak at a different level to the customer. But at the same time, probably some of the best reps I've encountered in my career, were not technical experts. It was just an ability to build relationships, do as you promise, really come back to the customer in a timely manner, all the really obvious things, that just makes common sense. But yeah, I think some salespeople do get hung up on knowing technical specifications, but it's not the be all and end all.
I think from a sales trainer's point of view, what we probably would say on that as well is people who understand the sales process and are able to manage the sales process and drive the sales process they're experts on that, if you like, as much as they are on their product knowledge. Have either of you ever lost a sale by being too technical? You don't need to give me the details.
I never lost any sales.
No, of course, Jonathan. No, yeah. I mean, back on Planet Reality, everybody. I don't
know. I'm not thinking of it. Nothing is really registering with me about being too technical. I think there were times that, I would be well overbearing on the specs of something, right? That just probably didn't really really connect, with them. Like, hey, this is exactly what you need. How do you know that? You didn't even ask me a question, right? Well, it's because you have this sitting on your bench, so that means you need this, right? I mean, those were the kind of things I think early on in my career that I missed a lot, where I made assumptions around what they needed. And then I would just go in and pitch my products about, oh, you've got Western blotting. Well, I have a transfer device that will do this in 10 minutes. Well, we really don't do much Western blotting, even though you see the rig sitting, it's things like that.
Yeah, interesting. How about you or your team?
Yeah, but again, probably similar examples. I'm sure I can't think of any specifics that jump out, but yeah, I think it's something certainly early on in your career where, you often go in and you may be a little bit too keen and enthusiastic, wanting to talk about technical, having not been ever really a technical expert. I suppose that's why I'm struggling to think of any real examples. I've always tried to be successful without that. So I'm sure we've all all fell foul of that at some point.
I can't think of any specifics, but I know in general terms that when I first moved from selling general lab equipment to moving into instrumentation, technical instrumentation, definitely lost sales because I wanted to show everything. You got to see the whole thing. You got to show every button, every application, every mode, every routine, everything on the software. And after half an hour, the customer's eyes are glazing over, and then they're probably saying, "Have you got a simpler one? Have you got a cheaper one? That's way too complicated. Give me the basic version." Yeah, I've definitely done that in my career.
I will say, Steve, like thinking about this, where I did fail technical is prospecting, where I would prospect just very technical, like, here's this email, here's this paper. And I'd have these like, I don't know. I thought that they made sense, but when I think back to it, it was like, why would you put that much information into like a reach out email? And it was literally technical. Yeah. And then I changed and I was like, all right, let me just write a 2-line email. And I would get more responses that way than these huge technical kind of pieces. But I think that there's definitely a need for technical follow-up. But I will say, thinking back, like my reach out based on technical was definitely not as successful as, the whole personalization and trying to bring some value.
Yeah, I've definitely done that as well. Definitely. Let's just sort of move slightly to a different topic on this one. I'm just thinking while you were talking there, Jonathan. So it's quite common. I don't know if it's the same for you, but it's sort of in lab equipment sales, it's quite common to have like a generalist salesperson that covers a whole range of products and knows a fair bit, and then have a product specialist that will come in and provide the more detailed support when needed on a particular product line or does that kind of thing work in your industry as well?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I've worked in maybe smaller companies where you're the one having to follow up and be, the trainer and go in and sort of not demonstrate the equipment, but train them on it once they've maybe purchased it. Yeah. In the current organisation where I work, we are fortunate. I do remind the sales team of this, that we have a clinical training team, and they support with both pre-sales and post-sales.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So they're not, I suppose they say they're not salespeople, but they're very much part of the sales process before and afterwards. So it's not in the, I know the sort of scenario you're talking about where it's maybe, a joint effort between salespeople, someone maybe more technical. So it's slightly different to that, but I've seen both. But I've also worked where you kind of have to be that person as well, and that's a little bit tougher. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So just sort of pushing that envelope a bit further then. So thinking about the scenario where there's a salesperson who's got some technical knowledge, but then a product specialist or applications person or whatever phrase they are, that is also like the more technical person. I've seen that work really well, and I've seen it work really badly in the sales teams. What are the things, and did you used to do that in your last company, Jonathan, for example?
Oh yeah.
What are the challenges with that?
I've always, in my whole career, I've always had the application scientist, to support me,
Okay.
And then in other roles, we had application scientists, science and technology advisors, another overlay, right?
Yeah.
And again, I've seen very good stuff out of it. I've seen very bad stuff out of it, right? I love the value add of bringing in an expert, right? Like, you should know a little bit about your product, but hey, are we really going to do a deep dive into this and your specific requirements, your specific setup? Let's bring in an expert. Let's talk about experimental design. Things that are way technical than me, things like that.
So what are the things we need to think about?
But I've also seen the flip side where, I've been more technical than they have.
Yeah.
And, that's where it's like, okay, well, what are you doing with this person? Why are they here? And
that's kind of where I'm going with this, really, because the challenge, I think, of this one is knowing when to bring them in, particularly, for example, North America, people flying on planes and hotels and rental cars and all that kind of stuff. How do we make that call as a technical salesperson when to bring in the product specialist? How do we know when it's the right time to do that? And how do we get that right? Yeah.
Again, it comes down to I think we preach a lot in this podcast, which is qualification and understanding the real needs of the customer. But I will say, in my previous roles, I've had reps who wouldn't go on a call without their STA with them, or wouldn't go on a call without, and that's, so that's like this extreme, right? And then you have the other reps who just would never use their STA. And it's like, well, okay, are they really getting the most benefit out of having these kind of roles, or the FAS? Are they really getting that benefit? But to me, it comes down to qualification. I mean, Matt, I'm sure you have some insights in this as well.
Yeah, I think we trust the team to make that call on when to bring that person in. And they're a very close-knit team. But yeah, I've worked in organizations where it's maybe more difficult to know exactly when to bring that person in. So I think it probably comes down to experience, the salesperson deciding this is the point where I need a bit more support here. It's either getting to the stage where they need to trial the equipment, or they're asking questions that really the salesperson isn't, because maybe they're not clinical or technical, they then do need that support. So I think it's just about using a bit of common sense to bring them in at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you quite rightly say, Jonathan, the importance of qualification. I think you said on the chat before the call that some of your business goes through distribution partners. So what about their technical knowledge? Is that an extra complexity? Because they presumably representing not just your products, but other companies' products as well.
Yeah.
How does that play out?
Yeah, I mean, we try and do regular training sessions with them. We also have technical experts within the company available to them as well. So, but yeah, you're right. It's a slightly more complicating factor because we're trying to train them up to be able to go out and do the same role as our direct sales team. So,
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so last thought on this from me then, really, and welcome your thoughts on this, really. What about right at the end of the sales process then? So let's assume we've done a great qualification, we're working through the sales process, and we're now in front of a buyer, a purchasing person, as opposed to a scientist or a clinician or a professor. What things do we think about from a technical knowledge perspective when we're in front of a buyer, guys, a purchasing person, presumably who hasn't got a lot of technical background at all in your products? Is there things we need to be aware of here, or things we need to think of? Yeah,
I think you want to avoid being overly technical. It's about reading the room and understanding what people's what they're looking for. Someone in procurement is not going to be wanting to know the ins and outs necessarily of a piece of equipment. It's more the cost or the ongoing costs. The maintenance side of things as well.
Yeah,
so
total cost of ownership and things. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's very much tailoring it to the audience, and certainly in our line of work, lots of different stakeholders with different interests, still around the same projects.
Interesting. What are your thoughts on this, John?
Yeah, I think Matt kind of nailed it. You don't want to be overly technical, even though I think, earlier it was always like, oh, well, they need this, right? Like the purchaser doesn't understand how much they need this because of the technical expertise and all the things that it's going to benefit them. But to me, it was always about setting the stage. What would you like to get out of this meeting, right? Like from the purchaser perspective, what do you need from me? Why are we meeting? What kind of things, can I potentially help you with? And then you start to get their feel of what they need. It could be service contract. It could be, what's up with installation, or it could be, what it comes down to a lot of times is just pricing, right?
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. But I always loved, starting that off. What can I assist you with? What are your aims of this meeting here? And put it on them, right? So it doesn't have to be me talking to them about service contracts and pricing and, all that kind of stuff. Let them figure out, let me know what's going on.
I once made again, I won't go into the details, but I once made a terrible mistake in front of a purchaser, but basically, and I paraphrase wildly by saying to them, of course you wouldn't understand this. In not so many words. And the purchaser said, whoa, different role, don't patronize me. So, dear listener, don't make the assumption that A, they're not remotely technical, and B, they wouldn't be interested. Because I've had purchasers say to me, can you just explain to me what it is that I'm buying? And they may want to know at the right level what the product is that you'll hopefully, well, you said I'm buying, so yes, they are buying. What it's doing for them, why they need it, how it benefits the organization. And I think being able to put that in I don't want to say layman's terms, but in the right terms is an important skill to have, really. So, yeah, that's you're nodding, Matt, yeah?
Yeah, I was going to add to that I've also seen sales reps make the mistake. Yeah, you don't want to assume that they don't want to know about the technical side, but I've seen people drop sort of clinical acronyms or things like that in, and you can just see that the procurement person has got no idea what they're talking about. So it's about finding that right level, and sort of, maybe not asking it in that way, Steve, as you explained, but trying to find
was a young salesman.
Politely. Yeah, no, I'm sure we've all been there.
By the way, you dropped the three-letter. You dropped a three-letter acronym earlier, Jonathan, which I let go. Remind me what the one you did, because when you were talking about product specialists.
Oh, there was a FAS.
STA. So just for the listener, what's an STA?
Science and Technology Advisor.
Thank you.
Okay. Instead of being more about training and really getting them up and running, it was more about the pre-work, like research, experimental design, really diving in. If my STA was with me, they had probably read 4 or 5 of this lab's papers, getting the nitty gritty down of that kind of stuff.
Got you. Okay. I just hadn't heard that term before, so thank you for that. Yeah.
But I loved, Steve, and Matt, when we talk about purchasing, I used to have, at the NIH, I would go to there used to be like one building with all the purchases in it. So, there would be like a floor where you're, because you work with this building, these are your purchasers. And I would do like a lunch and learn where I'd bring in lunch and I would do like a 101. These are my products.
That's a great idea.
When you see this happen. And it was cool because a lot of them were like, I don't know what this is, right? Things like that. But the credibility that it built where I can actually then just reach out and be like, hey, is this PO coming in today? Like, is there, Jonathan, we'll get right to it. It's like, it's just taking that extra step to really, and again, the 101 of it, right? It doesn't have to be technical. It just has to give somebody an understanding of what your product does. So when these POs come through, oh my God, they're doing next generation sequencing. Oh, I know what they're doing, right? It's kind of cool when you can connect your job to the value that it's bringing to the organization that you're
and that's the key
at.
thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. My wife's a vet, and lunch and learn's very popular within that industry as well, because they don't always have the time to meet with sales reps. But if they come in over lunch and kind of do an education session, I know it normally goes down well, depending on the quality of the sandwiches.
Yeah, you got to bring. The key is the lunch, right? It's like, oh, you're not bringing us pizza. No. We're getting Panera bread sandwiches and soup. Let's go.
It's we're getting off topic actually, but I found them always a great way to get into an account I wasn't necessarily active in, to do things like lunch and learns and approach people like HR departments and do it as training, and might just be a way of getting into an account that,
Yeah, but Steve, I will say something. There is something important to kind of what Matt was saying and what you're saying about these lunch and learns, right? I've had people walk away from technical seminars complaining about the food, right? So not about what they learned in the seminar. Again, it wasn't my seminar because I always had great food, but it was about the fact that, oh, I can't believe I went here and all I got was pizza and salad, right? Like, so
wow.
It's kind of funny. Like we talk about this, right? Think about a non-technical thing, which is what kind of food do you bring, right? Bring something that people are going to like, because you don't want, the last thing you want to do when you're doing one of these things is to people walk away being upset about something that has nothing to do with your product. Again, non-technical.
I'm really worried. Go on, Matt.
I was going to say, I've experienced that as well.
Wow.
One of my clinicians, when we're organising training, if it's an off-site event somewhere where we're inviting clinicians to come and be trained, the training might be free of charge or linked to some equipment that they've already purchased. But depending on what lunch is provided. So one of our clinicians is always very keen to check the menu on the venue before we commit to going there.
I'm really worried next time we have a team meeting now, Jonathan, that the food's going to be good.
Steve, we could sum this podcast up. Non-technical buying, just bring great food.
And
always help.
Guys, it's been a great knock around on this topic. It's an interesting one, and I think it's not a kind of a mainline sales process kind of topic for us that we would normally explore, really. But I think it's something to think about. Technical knowledge, technical experience is so, of course, important in our role, but it's not the be all and end all. One final thought from both of you on this before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think that, for people who think that they are technical, that's great. And again, I always want some type of technical competency in any sales rep, especially in our industry. But the sales skill sides of it are way more important than any kind of technical competency. Understanding how to make connections, personalizing things, qualification, being able to just build that credibility. Those are all things that I don't care how technical you are. You don't do those things, it doesn't matter. You're not going to get a second chance if you don't build that stuff.
Absolutely right. Absolutely.
Yeah, completely agree. I think, do your homework, always try and better yourself in terms of knowledge on, what your company can offer, but don't get hung up on it. There's more important things than just the technical specification or data sheets of products. So, yeah.
My final thought of this is I've had $1 million order before now for an instrument I couldn't even switch on. There are ways and means, but you do need to understand the sales process as well as the product features, of course. So I think that's what we both just said, really. Matt, thank you ever so much for coming on the pod.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Great to have you along. Please come again and join us again on a future show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been great. Fascinating finding out more about what you do and about your business as well. And if you out there, dear listener, would like to also come on the podcast on a future episode and join the panel, we would love to hear from you, really. If you work in our kind of core markets, life science, lab, medical devices, precision industrial, biotech, whatever broad church that means, we'd love to hear from you. If you work in sales management, product management even perhaps, we would love to have you on as a guest on the podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, then don't forget to leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. It does help us in lots of weird and wonderful ways. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks with another pod. Until then, happy selling, and we'll talk to you soon.